We do a 6-month-long course called the pre-flying training course, right? And this is something similar to what our NDA counterparts would have done in their 6th term. So the first stage of training was on the Kiran jet trainer, which is still flying. And the next stage was on a Polish aircraft called the Iskra. Iskra. He started screaming on the radios, pull out, pull out. My neighbor is also the person with whom I work, with whom I play sports, and with whom in war, both of us will take our arms to the enemy.
Yeah.
Right? Now, this is a kind of overlap which is so multi-layered. And your lives are enmeshed in such different ways that the weave is very strong and nothing can compare with that. Right? So that bonding and camaraderie and the trust and I got your back kind of feeling is
the same.
Absolutely. And the commitment to each other is so strong because you trust each other with your life. There was one attack like that in which I, again, somebody was looking after me, so missed the bullets by a few inches. If it's a 2-aircraft formation or a 4-aircraft formation that's going to cross the border and go into enemy area, there's nobody else with you.
Yeah.
There's nobody else but the 4 of you in enemy airspace, with everything against you, and you're watching each other's back. That's it. Wear your overalls in the morning and pick up your bag and you go to work. There's no guarantee you'll return. There are just multiple events where you know that, this sortie at this moment, actually I should have died. And that's where you say, all right, I am now a fighter pilot.
Hello and welcome to another amazing episode of the Brown Guy podcast. Guys, I grew up watching Top Gun and we all remember the character Maverick that Tom Cruise played. And what an amazing character he was. Inspirational, mentally strong, physically fit, got all the girls, right? But do we actually understand the complexities that an actual Indian Air Force pilot goes through? Do we know how difficult it is to do air combat maneuvering? Do we know how difficult it is to land on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean where a mistake of just 1 second can not only cost you your life, but it can also cost you a plane which is worth millions and millions of dollars that the country worked hard to acquire using taxpayers' money? Do we understand that certain very, very, very close calls have to be taken in order to defeat the enemy at the right kind of time if you are in between a dogfight? The truth is, we don't know all of this, right? We have only seen all of this in the movies. Today, our guest is someone very, very special. He was an Air Vice Marshal in the Indian Air Force. And my heart is filled with pride when I say Indian Air Force, right? So we are going to be asking him a lot of amazing questions today around his experience. And before this, I've actually told him to make it as descriptive and as graphic as possible so that me and you could relive all of his amazing experiences through the Brown Guy podcast. Stay tuned, keep watching, enjoy. Air Vice Marshal Dhananjay Khot, sir, welcome on the Brown Guy podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I, for one, have been a huge fan of the Indian Air Force. Definitely, they are our saviors. But other than that, also of the Air Force in general. So when I was growing up, my generation, I'm a 90s kid, right? So when we were growing up, Top Gun was like a big sensation around the movie space. And whatever Tom Cruise did in that movie, all the mid-air dogfights and everything, they were considered to be very cool, right? And it's so lovely that I'm actually meeting someone so senior from the Indian Air Force today. Lots of things to ask you, lots of things where I want to pick your brain. But before that, I want to start with how was your life before joining the Indian Air Force? What inspired you to join the Indian Air Force and how did all of that happen, sir?
Thank you, Jaideep. Thank you for having me on the Brown Guy podcast, and thank you to the team doing this particular podcast. Quite impressed with what you're trying to do here in reaching out to people with stories that are rarely heard.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so to come back to your question, an absolutely ordinary kid, middle class, born, brought up in Mumbai. My family hails from south of Maharashtra there. My father came and settled here. He was part of the Mumbai police and spent most of his life in the CID department of the Bombay
Oh, wow.
Police. Yeah, in the in those 60s and 70s and 80s, those
Yeah.
exciting years when it was considered one of the finest forces,
Yeah.
detective forces in the world. And just growing up in Bombay, Dadar area, and going to the what is known as the King George High School at the time, and then Ruparel College. Uh, as quiet and as happy a childhood as you can imagine. Very, very ordinary. Okay. The good things were that I had two uncles in uniform. And my father, of course, whenever he was not
Yeah.
in place clothes, was in uniform.
Yeah.
So we were not strangers to the uniform.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a maternal uncle. I had a maternal uncle who was in the Navy. He was among the pioneering submariners of the Indian Navy. And I had an uncle on my father's side who was in the Indian Air Force. And he was a radar person, technical person. So these were some of the early introductions to that. My life took quite a different turn somewhere around the time I was in the 11th or 12th. And I was reading up a fair bit on military history. So there was always that little bit of, stuff was being deposited in the mind. But more importantly, what I thought I would be doing and what everybody thought I would be doing with my life was either painting professionally or classical music. So that was part of that was the core of what our growing up years were about.
Wow.
Okay. Nobody would have thought military, including me, for the simple reason I was a very thin person. I was the runt of the class. Okay, so I was the shortest guy in the class. Nobody would have associated me with anything that physical or that, military.
Yeah.
But then things changed. And somewhere along the line, maybe around the time I was in that 10th, 11th, the stuff that I was reading, all of that started to take a separate shape in my mind. I wasn't really aware of it. And then there was this trip when I was in the 11th, when I went to visit my uncle. He was in the Air Force. He was in Chandigarh.
Wow.
And then he took me to see the Air Force station. And there were these MiG-21s, that were flying out of the thing. And I saw a couple of takeoffs as they roared over my head. And I knew where I wanted to be.
Wow.
And then after that, everything else kind of just faded out.
Yeah.
And then it was nothing but the Air Force. But a lot of it had to do with the reading that had in a subliminal fashion got deposited in my subconscious, I think. And that was driving a whole different, mental scheme internally that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
But all of it kind of came together at that time. So that's how I, turned from the sitar and the canvas to the
Towards the
aircraft.
Indian Air Force.
So painted a whole different life.
Wow. That's a good way of putting it.
And played some entirely different music. So.
Wow. More to understand about the music in terms of what you played in the IAF. So, when did you join or when you get commissioned in the IAF, and how were your starting years? When did you get trained?
Yeah. So I did my BSc with physics. And that was a requirement to join the Air Force.
Okay.
You had to be a
It still is, right?
It still is.
Still is.
Physics or a maths graduate.
Yeah.
You have to have that. And for the flying branch.
Yeah.
The other thing was, along with that, I was doing my Air Wing NCC, Senior Wing NCC.
Yeah.
And those were very, very important years. And they shaped a great deal because the opportunities that I got in the NCC were absolutely outstanding.
Wow.
And there was something, inside me wanting to do more and more of the adventurous stuff, more and more of the military stuff. So I and a few of my other friends, we kind of sought more and more of the experience. So I got to do scuba diving, I got to do parajumping. These were all courses based on selection.
Wow.
So they were competitive courses, right? So
Yeah.
you had to compete with a bunch of other people to find your place there.
Yeah.
And so all that meant that the little runt had to grow up, had to grow taller. They had to go stronger.
Yeah.
And I had to fight to keep my place among people who were otherwise so much better than me, physically speaking. But all of that, it shaped me. And then came a whole series of camps and going to the Republic Day camp in Delhi, meeting people from all over India, and just an extremely positive, extremely uplifting, extremely inspiring 3 years that I spent in the NCC, and that has shaped me to such a huge extent that I can see some of that in my own conduct even now.
Wow.
right? And then I joined the Air Force. You have to go through a series of tests at the
Yeah.
Services Selection Board. So you apply, they call you up if you've met the initial eligibility conditions,
Yeah.
and you go through a 5-day battery of tests. That includes the pilot aptitude test if you want to be a pilot, and then a host of other tests which are common for all branches.
Okay.
And if you make the cut and the merit in that one, if
Yeah.
you clear that, then you go for your medicals. The medicals are very, very thorough for the Air Force.
Yeah.
The most stringent medicals for
Certain
all,
height
among all three.
requirement, weight requirement,
Yeah.
and even other parts
There's
of
physical
yeah.
stuff, then there's
Yeah.
medical stuff.
Yeah.
So your physical parameters, and in the Air Force, for the cockpit requirements,
Yeah.
there are some very strange anthropometric considerations. For example, the leg length.
The
Has-
length
has-
of your leg.
The length of your hand, your arms.
Wow.
Okay, because everybody's built differently.
Yeah.
Even genetically, we have different construction,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So people have different proportions of torso to legs,
Yeah.
right? And so your sitting height is important. A person with too long a torso, right?
Might not fit inside the aircraft.
Yeah. So the earlier generation of fighter aircraft, like the NATs and the MiG-21s and the MiG-23s,
Yeah.
we had a height limit. So if a person was excessively tall, you couldn't fit him in a fighter cockpit. He would have to go to a transport or a helicopter. That was so there was a range of heights within which you had to fit. Right?
What was this range, just for my understanding? Was it like
It goes from
5'8"?
about- no, it starts at about 5'3", 5'4".
5'3", 5'4".
Yeah,
Okay.
that's adequate. You have to have legs long enough to reach the rudder pedals
Yeah.
and to be able to manipulate them.
Yeah.
Arms long enough to reach all the switches and things that are
Correct.
required to be in the
Yeah.
cockpit. Right? So there are all of those things. And then, of course, like I said, sitting height and all. These are all strange requirements which are very Air Force specific
Yeah.
and quite an eye-opener. And then, of course, when you say medical stuff, now you're going inside. Now everything comes down to your hearing acuity, your visual acuity, your color acuity, all of those things. And then going into the systems, how they are working.
Yeah.
Heart, the digestive systems, all of those. So the pathological tests are there. All of these tests, they give them a picture of where you are.
Yeah.
They do the EEG to check out whether your brain is
Brain
functioning
activity,
correctly, and
yeah.
under stress, how is it going to work, right? If you've got any kind of susceptibility to seizures, that is detected.
Yeah.
So all those things come out, and strange stuff comes out which you never know of. How your spine is. People have different conditions related to the spine that wouldn't be a bother in the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Even if you lived 100. But in the Air Force, it's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Because it can mean the difference between a safe ejection and a non-safe ejection.
Wow.
So all these things are there. So the medicals are stringent. Once you clear that, now you wait for the merit list and then you join the academy. So in my case, as a direct entry person, since I joined after graduation, that's called a direct entry, we do a 6-month-long course called the pre-flying training course.
Okay.
Right? And this is something similar to what our NDA counterparts would have done in their 6th term.
Yeah.
Right? So it's to bring a civilian up to speed on the basics and also a certain amount of boot camp activity so that the person is physically toughened up, mentally toughened up enough to start his flying training. So the first stage of our flying in those days, there was a period in between where we did not have a propeller-driven aircraft.
Okay.
Okay. Till that time they were. And then they were phased out because they got obsolete. So about 9 courses of flying training, they went all jet. So mine was one of them.
Propeller driven was a Gen 2?
No, propeller-driven aircraft are everywhere, all around us. And typically, early training starts on them because they are slower, easier to cope with,
Yeah.
right? And the performance and everything else is a little more benign,
Yeah.
right? Jets tend to be a little more demanding. They have to be faster,
Have to be. Yeah.
right? Jets can't fly at speeds as low as the propeller-driven aircraft can. But this was kind of a catch-22 situation for the Air Force. So they had to change the syllabus and go. So we practically climbed out from bicycles and into the jet cockpit.
Yeah.
So 9 courses of us, we trained all jet. So the first stage of training was on the Kiran jet trainer, which is still flying. And the next stage was on a Polish aircraft called the Iskra.
Iskra.
So in my case, those first 6 months were at the Air Force Academy at Dundigal near Hyderabad. And the second phase on the Iskras was at Hakimpet, which is also near Secunderabad area.
Okay.
And so we finished that, finished our flying training. At the end of the flying training, based on your performance throughout that 1 year, you get trifurcated into fighters, transports, or helicopters.
Yeah.
Right? Those who do not make the cut there have the option to either go to navigation, right, where you're not hands-on on flying, but you are doing cockpit duties otherwise, and very important operational duties, right? And some people who do not make the cut for flying also have the option of transferring either to the administrative branch or the logistics branch.
Yeah.
right? So ground duty branches, which have their own, kind of activity setup, and also do offer a lot of adventure activities other than being hands-on
Yeah.
flying an aircraft. So that's how the thing is, and so that's how the initial flying training is. After this, those who train, who are selected to train on fighters, will go on to the MiG-21 aircraft, or used to go on to the MiG-21. Now they go on to a different, the Hawks. Today now is the Hawk aircraft. So those days we went on to the MiG-21s.
Yeah.
That initial flying was mostly done out of Tezpur and Hashimara, which are in Assam. And so that was an absolutely exciting year and a half of learning how to fly a real fighter.
Wow.
Right. So that's
was
where
your first experience actually sitting in a fighter jet.
in a fighter, yeah.
And-
Because although the trainers we flew were all jet trainers,
Yeah.
they were also weapons capable.
Okay.
Okay, but they're not frontline fighters. They can be utilized. They could be utilized in war for certain roles
Yeah.
and certain operations. Right? They have a secondary operational role. But the fighter does nothing else but fight for its living. So,
Yeah.
right? So that's where the dream actually comes alive. And the first time you take that MiG-21 and fly solo,
Yeah.
and that's where you say, all right, I am now a fighter pilot.
Wow. Wow. That was amazing. How was your life with your brothers in the Indian Air Force? What was the kind of bonding that this training, developed between? Because I always hear army stories wherein there's a crazy amount of bonding because life depends on each other, and I'm sure the case with the Indian Air Force is the same. So how was that?
Oh, absolutely. Something very, very special, and that's very rare to see in civil life.
Yeah.
Although there are certain cases where it comes a little closer, but it's incomparable in the armed forces. Several reasons for that. What is difficult or different about life in the armed forces is you live your life away from your hometown
Yeah.
and your families.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're very kind of lucky, sometimes you may get a posting close to your hometown.
Yeah.
But that's again a rarity.
That's luck.
And that's luck. And a lot of things have to be, for example, you have to have a base near your hometown. Then you
Yeah.
can get
Yeah.
posted there, right? Otherwise, you can't. So you always live away from hometown. You
Yeah.
live away from the family that raised you, from your brothers and sisters. You're away from your school friends, your college friends, your neighborhood friends, everybody that you grew up with,
Yeah.
right? And you keep moving every 2 to 3 years to a different base to serve with a different bunch of people.
Yeah.
Right. In the Air Force, like in the Army, there is a regimental thing. You're commissioned into a particular battalion or so on, right? That becomes your parent battalion, parent regiment. And the people that you are working with, they continue to be more or less the same people that you grew up with in service, right? So that's part of the bonding thing.
Yeah.
In the Air Force, we have the squadrons. And the squadrons are essentially the fighting units.
Yeah.
So you have flying squadrons, like a fighter squadron, a transport squadron, a helicopter squadron, and you have missile squadrons, right? Because missiles also do a certain amount of air defense work. So they're also fighting units. So life within the squadron is actually extremely cohesive and tight,
Yeah.
right? The commanding officer is the center of the universe,
Yeah.
right? The flight commander, who's the second in command, and the chief of operations, so to say, he drives the whole story of how everyday life unfolds, the planning of what we're going to do, etc., etc. And then there are the people who are a little more senior, and then a little more junior, and so on and so
Yeah.
forth till the tail end. So when you join a squadron, you're at the bottom rung there. You're going to learn to fly with that squadron.
Yeah.
Every squadron has a particular role depending on the aircraft, also depending on where it is positioned for war.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to train for those specific roles. And you continue to do this, syllabi, one after the other. Training never finishes. So first you do your conversion training on that type of aircraft. Then you go on to become an operational pilot on that aircraft. So that's a whole long syllabus, can take up to a year,
Wow.
depending on which aircraft. And you're going along that syllabus, which can be, like 100 something sorties, right? And you have to clear each phase with a test. Right? So you're continuously under test, under training, and under the scrutiny of your seniors.
Yeah.
Right? So this makes for a very, very close bond. That's number one.
Wow.
Two, you are kind of, what is again very different about the armed forces is unlike in Civil Street where your school friends are different, your neighborhood friends are different, right? Your relatives are different, your college friends, your work friends, all of them are different people.
Yeah.
Where you live is where your neighborhood community is. And that's a circle that you bond with. Your work friends is another circle where you bond, right? And these two are usually separate. right? And then you may have certain hobbies. You play cricket, you play badminton. You could have friends that are related to that.
Yeah.
You have fun activity friends.
Yeah.
In the armed forces, we work with the same people, we live with the same people, we play with the same people, we fight
Alongside the
the
same
enemy
people.
shoulder to shoulder with the same people.
Yeah.
There's no part of our life which is not overlapped.
Wow.
Right? So where I'm in trouble, my neighbor is also the person with whom I work, with whom I play sports, and with whom in war, both of us will take our arms to the enemy.
Yeah.
Right? Now, this is a kind of overlap which is so multi-layered. And your lives are enmeshed in such different ways that the weave is very strong.
Yeah.
And nothing can compare with that. Right? And families are families. Your blood bonds are blood bonds. But I can tell you that any soldier that you talk to, by the time he's served 25, 30 years or whatever, right, the uniformed family becomes his first family. And there are things you have shared and things that you have shared very intensely.
Yeah.
Okay, nothing compares with that.
Wow.
Right? And so this is a whole different thing. And what is beautiful is this is true of the armed forces all over the world. I spent 2.5 years in the US. It was no different. Right? So that bonding and camaraderie and the trust and I got your back kind of feeling
Is the
is
same.
absolutely. And the commitment to each other is so strong because you trust each other with your life. If it's a 2-aircraft formation or a 4-aircraft formation that's going to cross the border and go into enemy area, there's nobody else with you. There are some people of yours who are on the ground watching you on radar and giving you inputs. You're trusting your life to those comrades, some of whom you will never meet.
Yeah.
It's just a voice on the radio for you. But he's watching your back. And you trust him entirely.
Wow.
Our fighter controllers, our ATC controllers.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're the people with whom you're flying. There'll come a point where you're out of radio contact with your home bases, so you're not talking anymore.
Yeah.
There's nobody else but the 4 of you
Yeah.
in enemy airspace with everything against you, and you're watching each other's backs. That's it. So you work as a team, you look around, you find the enemy coming in, you warn the others, you take actions accordingly, to do whatever. So that kind of intensity of experience, of mutual experience, which you can share with nobody else. And sortie to sortie, we have memories right from our early days where we meet after 30 years and say, remember that sortie and how it happened. And there's no third person can know those conditions. And even today, that experience just returns with the same intensity.
Yeah.
And that bond is relived
Yeah.
and revived every time. That's the bonding.
Wow. So I think also major part is the kind of challenges that you correctly said you guys face together.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
I think that also accelerates the bond building, and that is a very different thing. When you go together with the same experience, it's crazy, right? The bonding level is crazy.
No
Speaking
doubt.
of that, what are like some of the, and I'm sure there are many, but what are some of the biggest challenges you faced? Was it a terrorist threat? Was it a hijacked aircraft that was landing on your base that you are in charge of? Was it something else, or was it probably you had to eject out of your own aircraft? What was it?
There are multiple things. Like you said, the intensity of the life you lead in the armed forces is very different because every day it's a matter of life and limb,
Yeah.
right? So when you wear your overalls in the morning and pick up your bag and you go to work, okay, there's no guarantee you'll return.
Yeah.
When you walk to that aircraft, right, you're going to do things that are inherently risky,
Yeah.
right? We are trained to handle that. That's okay. But every day is a fresh challenge.
Yeah.
Every day you return home after having flown 2-3 sorties, whatever else. It's like you've been gifted another day with the family. Okay. And every time you walk to the aircraft, there's no guarantee that you'll see the next sunrise.
Correct.
It puts life in a lot of perspective.
Yeah.
And people who can do that on an everyday basis are a special bunch of people.
No doubts.
Okay, and that kind of underpins the life you lead. So when you decide to don the uniform, you are promised to the nation.
Yeah.
Everything else is secondary. That's number one. The second part is you're trained for handling that.
Yeah.
And third, even if you may be alone in the cockpit, you know that as a force, you are never going to be alone.
Yeah.
Right? And that helps you to do the challenges and take on the risks day after day after day. If I was to look back and say, what were the crazy things that happened, there are just multiple events where you know that this sortie at this moment, actually I should have died. And I screwed up something. I wasn't watching something I should
with
have.
which you're saying that is crazy.
No, you come back, and there are times when you jump out of your skin because you realize that, I just missed it.
Yeah.
Okay, there are many such moments.
Yeah.
Okay, and everybody will have stories, of this nature, and you just know, okay, someone has watched your back and pulled you out. Guardian angels have been working overtime. Yeah. Okay, so flying has many such things.
Yeah.
I remember one episode when I was learning to fly the MiGs.
Yeah.
And we were doing our armament training. This was in the northeast, flying out of Tezpur. And we have an air-to-ground firing range called Dulangmukh Range, which is close to the northeastern end of India near Chabua, close to the Arunachal-Assam border. So it's a small patch of land surrounded by trees and then some foothills start off. So we used to go there and then do our air-to-ground firing, right? So there are targets on the ground. And you do your rocketry or your gun firing or dropping your bombs. So I was doing this dive bombing, which is at about 30-35 degrees kind of a dive angle. The MiG-21 accelerates very fast, right?
I'm sure.
And so you go into a dive a couple of kilometers over the thing, and you put the aircraft in a dive, and then you're tracking the target. You're basically doing the aiming as the aircraft accelerates to the firing speed, which is quite high.
There's an aircraft ahead of you, and then you're trying to aim at that aircraft.
No, not aircraft. This is air-to-ground firing.
Air-to-ground fire. Okay.
So you're practicing to fire on targets on the ground.
On the ground,
Okay.
yeah.
So bombing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why you're pointed at the earth.
Yeah.
Right. And so the ground comes up pretty fast. So you have to be very watchful. By the time you fire, you're flying at something like 250 to 270 meters per second.
270 meters per second is what you're flying
about
at.
250, so you may be plus minus 20 odd kilometers per hour there because of the flying accuracies and things like that. And then at the precise moment, you have to drop the bomb by pressing a trigger. And if you're a little early, the bomb will fall short. If you are a little late, the bomb will overshoot. That's one part.
Yeah.
And then you go to pull the aircraft out with about 5G or so. Right?
At about 5G,
4 to 5G,
you need to again pull the aircraft
You
up.
have to pull the aircraft out, otherwise you'll hit the ground, right?
When does the G actually hit you? Does it hit you when you're going down, or does it actually hit you when you're coming up?
G is basically whenever there is the aircraft is in a turning motion.
Yeah.
The turn could be in this direction, turn could be this direction.
So we're talking about centrifugal force acting on it, right?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. So that's exactly what you feel. That's what you experience. It's a centrifugal force. So, and you have to pull the aircraft out because otherwise the exploding bomb throws up a lot of fragments. Those fragments can hit and damage your own aircraft. And if you happen to be later than that, then you can hit the ground in the process of pull-out. Because at that speed, a certain amount of height is lost in the process of pull-out, right?
So you'll actually crash.
Turn the corner there, you'll crash. And a number of people have crashed, right? Because of certain delays. So now I was in this dive here, and we're supposed to do the trigger press based on the altimeter, which is winding down now rapidly. And so at a particular precise point, a certain height above the ground, you're supposed to press the trigger and initiate your pull-out.
Yeah.
And so I went to the dive, and I'm all engrossed wanting to get my direct hit or whatever, and wanting to get a good score on the ground. I'm a trainee. And so I look at the altimeter, and it's at somewhere around 2 kilometers. And then I again look at the target. I look back up again, and it is still somewhere around 2 kilometers. And I said, that's not right. It should not be showing me the same height. I'm in a bloody dive here.
Yeah.
And then I looked back at it, and then it dropped in too steep. Something was wrong with it that day.
Oh.
So it was kind of getting stuck, right? And so it fell in two large things, like one about 400-500 meters drop, and then another 400-500 meters drop. So I was already below the height I should have pressed the trigger by the time I registered this, right? And the ground is, of course, rushing at me at whatever 250 to 70 meters per second. And I realized, and around that time, the range safety officer who's on radios and watching every dive and measuring the parameters that you came at so-and-so dive angle and where your bomb hits and so on, he started screaming on the radios, pull out, pull out, pull out.
God.
So I yanked the stick into my stomach and crazy amount of G I pulled. I don't know what I clocked. It was not a good figure.
6G? 6G?
It must have been much more. So anyway, so it was a bad number. And so the aircraft pulls out.
Yeah.
And now I've got the stick in my stomach and the G is hitting me. So I'm kind of crunched in the seat.
Yeah.
And in the periphery of my vision, I see the treetops. Okay. and outside the cockpit, some distance away, but I see treetops on the side.
So you were at the height of.
I must have bottomed out at a pretty low height. So I don't know what that height might have been, but it must have been a few meters off the ground. I lived. So this is
my
one. And this is not unusual. This happens to people. Most of my life was spent at low levels because I was a ground attack pilot, and the profile and the aircraft I flew was basically a low level, high speed kind of profile.
Yeah.
So we used to fly low. All right. And we used to fly very low. And there are areas on which we fly even further low. So there are times when you are going rather fast, very close to the ground, and the speeds are of the order of somewhere between 800 to 1,000 kilometers per hour, right? This is indicated airspeed. So actually airspeeds could be of the order of 1,100 kilometers per hour when you're doing certain high-speed dashes, getting away from somebody chasing you and stuff like that. You go high speed. And so low heights, and some of our bombing is done at a very, very low height.
Yeah.
So there are moments there when you're in a crazy turn, you're looking back, trying to see the guy who's chasing you, the air defense pilot who's trying to, kill you. And then you're in a turn at low level. It's supposed to be a slightly climbing turn to keep you safe, but it doesn't always work out because you're not watching it.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's so many experiences that so many of us have had where you suddenly find that you've been descending.
Yeah.
Then you catch it in time and you recover the aircraft. So these are just, there would be, if you go to ground attack pilots and anybody flying low level, you'll find thousands of such cases.
So if in that incident you would have been probably a second or 2 seconds late, was there a possibility that you would have crashed?
Yeah.
You would have
No
crashed.
question. You would have crashed, yeah. You would have hit either a high-powered, high tension lines or a tree top or a building or something like that. That can happen.
But at 270 meters per second speed.
No, that's your forward speed. So in this case, you're flying low.
Yeah.
Your actual rate of descent may be of the order of 5, 10, 15 meters per second. But if you don't watch that
Very
for a few
fast.
seconds, that builds up to a fair amount.
Yeah.
So this is part of flying that everybody who's flown experiences, right? So they're there. Then there was a one episode on the ground. This is during the Punjab militancy days when I was a young pilot and returning after a sports match. And so this random firing and little terror attacks used to happen.
Okay.
And so there was one episode
On ground we're talking about.
on ground.
On ground, yeah.
So there was one attack like that in which I again somebody was looking after me, so missed the bullets by a few inches.
So they shot at you.
They shot at me.
So you were deployed with the army?
No. I just returning after a basketball match, just coming back home.
And
This
they
is-
shot at you.
Yeah, I don't think they were targeting me. And there were several of us returning. Happened to be on my scooter, and the car behind me kind of overtook me, and the windows rolled down. Carbines popped up out of the windows, and they fired, and they went through where I was. So I just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. So not that they were targeting me specifically or something. I was nobody.
It's a terror attack.
Yeah,
And they were
So this
randomly
is
they wanted
random.
to. Yeah.
So about 4 or 5 people got hit. Nobody was killed in that particular attack. But I missed the bullets. And so there were those crazy random stuff. So just as there were exciting moments in the air, there were these exciting
On the
moments
ground
on the
as well.
Yeah. And then, of course, when you're activated for war, then you're on the edge because you're getting ready to cross the border with weapons. You're briefed for the missions. You're briefed on the target. Your formation refreshes that briefing,
Yeah.
and you think, and prepare for it, for every possible eventuality.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an extended, long period of alert, right?
Yeah.
And those are also the times when people can hit you. The enemy can
Yeah.
hit you in different
Yeah.
ways, right? So you're on the alert in every way. When I was base commander, that was a period after the Pathankot attack had happened. And there were a lot of intelligence inputs that used to come of terrorists who would have wanted to attempt something similar.
Yeah.
So everybody after the Pathankot thing was on a hair trigger.
Yeah.
And we would go into a very high alert states at that point, and the whole base gets ready to defend itself. And those are very kind of stressful times because you don't know. Air Force bases are huge. Okay, so you can't guard every inch of it.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm talking 2017, 18. The entire perimeter wasn't really, covered by sensors and stuff like that, electronic and other automated devices. So you were banking a lot on your forces,
Yeah.
right? Of watching stuff
Yeah.
with eyes and with every other things. You have your dogs, you have a variety of other things. And there were a variety of ways in which they can sneak in. Right?
Yeah.
They can tunnel in,
Yeah.
right? And break out the last portion at night. The last thing, they could start tunneling from the fields outside. You would never know.
You never know.
They could fly in on these powered hang gliders. That was one of the threats at the time, right?
Something that was done in the Israel attack, the Hamas attack that was done on Israel, they came on gliders. Was that the similar thing?
Something similar to that. So essentially, you fly in over the normal obstructions and fences that you put on the ground.
Yeah.
And at night, that's dangerous. So we had several such alarms when there were moving things that were detected and reported by people.
Okay, so that's what I was asking. Can gliders be detected on radar?
It depends on what kind of gliders, but when you talk about powered hang gliders, these are like one man hanging on one of them. Right? They're very, very small.
Yeah.
They do have a small engine and so on and so forth. So depending on whether that engine happens to be facing your radar, you may get a ping or you may not, depending on how far it is, how small that signal is.
It's a bleak
whether
chance.
it is detectable or not.
Yeah.
Right? So all these are so many variables, there is no guarantee.
Yeah.
Right? And so you have radars usually looking towards the enemy borders and those.
Yeah.
You don't have radars looking inwards at your own base.
Yeah.
Right? Why would you want to do that? But such are the situations, and so there are those episodes in which you're all armed, you're up all night, you're moving from post to post, and making sure that people are aware, they are alert, and they are all charged up to face whoever may be coming in. So these are some exciting things.
Wow.
I did have an ejection episode as well.
So you actually ejected out of an
1981.
aircraft?
Yes.
Wow. Tell us about that, sir.
Yeah, so this happens. The ejection seat is kind of the fighter pilot's last hope.
Were you alone in the aircraft? Because some aircrafts have two pilots, right?
No, I was alone.
You were alone
This
in
is a fighter.
Okay.
The fighter is usually a single seat, unless the fighter by design is a twin seat like the Sukhoi 30.
Yeah.
Right? Or like the Phantom used to be there in the US Air Force. But most of the fighters are single seat.
Right.
Okay. So I was in a MiG-23 BN, and we were doing our annual range firing over the Pokhran range in Rajasthan. So the Air Force has
That's like a drill.
Yeah. So every year you go out there, you spend a couple of weeks, you're given the live armament annually. Right?
Yeah.
Because the rest of the year you fire some live armament, but mostly practice armament.
Yeah.
Because you operate at smaller ranges.
Yeah.
Where at the smaller ranges, because the villages are not too far away, you don't want to drop the real bombs.
Correct.
Right? Because some kind of fragments can reach there and things like that can happen.
Correct.
So there are certain ranges which are cleared for you to drop the actual live armament that you would use in war. So the Pokhran is one of those ranges, and then we have others all over the country. So we used to do our annual drills, of live bombing, and so that's where you actually get to experience carrying a 3-ton or a 4-ton payload. Right? When your aircraft is actually carrying that much, the aircraft behaves differently because it's carrying so much weight.
Yeah.
So to experience and to be able to master, all of that, then you do these practices annually. So I was firing heavy caliber rockets, and after firing them in a dive during the pullout, something went wrong with the engine, and the engine caught fire.
So you fired a missile and then something went wrong with the engine.
Yeah. Whether the two things are correlated in
I was
the
about to
cause
ask
and
you that,
effect
yeah.
relationship, we were never able to find out.
Okay.
We don't know why that happened. Ultimately, I think the people said in all probability, something broke inside the aircraft, unconnected with the heavy caliber rockets that I was firing. And so the engine caught fire, and the engine's obviously not accessible. You're essentially sitting at the front end of the engine.
Yeah.
Right? The pilot sits right in front of the engine. Engine's behind you.
Yeah.
And so it's all behind you. It's not accessible. There is a fighting system. So you operate that. So that releases some. But that didn't check the fire. Okay, so I tried to switch off and do one relight. That was the only thing I could have done under the circumstances. Didn't work. The aircraft continued to burn, and the fire warning came on again. I had about 41 seconds in which to...
That's it.
Yeah,
Only
yeah,
40
very,
seconds?
very long.
You have to decide before that.
Very, very long 40 seconds with a lot of actions in between. You have to sweep the wings, you have to lock your harness, ejection seat harness tight, multiple actions and switchery to be done because you're trying to control the situation. You have to fly the aircraft. Someone has to fly the aircraft while all this is happening, right?
Can you also control, so once you've decided that you are going to eject, right? After that, can you control where the aircraft being a projectile, lands?
No.
You can't control that.
No.
So it can go to a civilian area.
It could, but which is why these large ranges, are secluded for that reason.
Yeah.
Right? And in the direction of firing, the closest village I think is Shri Mohangarh, and that's about 14 kilometers away.
Okay.
And my aircraft fell maybe 4 kilometers short of that.
Still a very narrow range.
Because the aircraft was a great glider. And
Yeah.
so it just continued to glide till it hit.
Yeah.
So from the time all of these happened, it must have glided 7-8 kilometers at least, or more, a little bit more. Okay. And then it hit the ground and burnt. So once it was clear that the aircraft was dead, then it was only a matter of time before it covered the distance between where it was and the ground. And if I didn't get out in time, then I would be dead. So that's how the whole ejection scenario is. So when you know that the aircraft cannot be recovered anymore,
Yeah.
you
have to take that call.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once
If you want to live.
of course. So once you eject, what happens after that?
Yeah.
So you go up, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a small, a small explosion that happens there. So it kind of launches you up in
Yeah.
the air. And then in how many seconds do you actually land? When do you open the chute?
This particular class of ejection seats that was on the Russian aircraft of those times, the MiG-21, the MiG-23, MiG-27, all of them had the same seat. You're essentially sitting on a gun. So your ejection seat is constructed around a kind of a gun barrel. They're tubes. They're telescopic tubes, one inside the other.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there are explosive charges there at the bottom of that. Right? And there is a whole series of actions that takes place once you pull the handle.
Yeah.
So it is such a beautiful design. And so guaranteed to work correctly every time. It's a marvel.
Wow.
And so if the last conscious action of an injured pilot, let us say, is to pull the ejection handles, okay, he need not be conscious thereafter.
Yeah.
Everything else happens automatically. So there's a series of charges that go off around you.
Yeah.
Because the canopy has to go off.
That's the first thing. Yeah.
That's the first thing that has to happen, right? So the canopy has to go off, and there are things that are connected to the canopy. Unless the canopy goes and it pulls a cord, certain other things will not be activated. So there are safety devices.
There's
everywhere.
a protocol for doing all of that.
Yeah, so it's all built into the system.
Okay.
Right? So there is a whole sequence of actions, and that is automated. So you just pull the handles. And so it sounded like, my personal experience of the thing. The immediate thing was, it was like patakas going off, like firecrackers going off, because there's so many small explosions around you.
Yeah.
So it just sounds like, that ta-ta-ta-ta-ta kind of thing.
Correct.
And that's happening. And the next thing is just the very high G forces hit you as you're propelled out of the aircraft. You're shot out of the aircraft.
Yeah.
Essentially, you're sitting on a gun.
That shoots you out.
Yeah, and the gun shoots you out. It shoots not just you out, it shoots a seat out that itself weighs around 80-100 kilos.
100 kilos?
Around 80 kilos plus the survival pack and the other things that are in it. And then you're on it because it's all made of very hard, durable stuff.
Yeah.
It's heavy. So all of this weight has to be propelled out. So there's a lot of charge there, right?
Wow.
Your own weight. I was a lightweight, so that was okay. And so all the G forces come crushing onto you. So you're like a rag doll. You have just no power to control anything in your body. Your eyesight goes off immediately. You black out because the blood is forced out of your head. My head hit the, chin hit the chest.
Yeah.
Right? And just stayed there. There's nothing I could have done. The eyesight had gone. And there was this whole, just crushed to the seat like that. And then the next thing was as you hit the airflow, right? I was slow enough. The gliding speed is about 450
Did
kilometers.
you pass out?
No, I did not. So I did not go unconscious. So I have a very clear memory of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But your eyesight goes for those couple of seconds, right? The whole sequence till the parachute deploying is barely above 2 seconds. From the time the sequence starts and the first explosion takes place, right, to the parachute deploying is barely above 2 seconds.
That's it.
That's it. And this whole high G and the whole shooting out is so that you miss your own aircraft hitting you and killing you, as you leave the aircraft.
Yeah.
So you have to be propelled out. And the second thing is to create enough distance so that it allows, because after that you start to fall, right?
Yeah.
So a certain amount of height has to be built in so that as the parachute is opening, you're falling.
How much do you go up? Is it like 50 feet, 40 feet from your current altitude?
Yeah, it's about that much. It's about 20 meters or thereabouts above
Roughly.
wherever you did. Now, aircraft is in a descent, mind you.
Yeah.
Right? So your upward velocity is actually being neutralized partly by your downward velocity. Right?
Correct.
Yeah. But in relative terms, you're clearing the aircraft.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're too close to the ground and in a descent, that's not enough to save a life. So there is a particular formula that we use for distance above the ground at which a safe ejection is guaranteed.
Yeah.
If you happen to be descending, you may be off the ground, but you'll still hit the ground before the parachute opens.
And before you slow down enough.
Slowing down is not
before
an
the
option.
parachute opens itself.
Yeah.
So then you'll hit the ground.
Yeah, slowing down is almost immediate after the parachute opens in terms of descent rates. That's okay. And then the airflow hits. So at that time, I remember my neck flailing. You've seen the little ribbons truck drivers put on their things sometimes? On the little rods on the side?
Yeah.
And how they flail
How
in
they
the
react to the wind.
like a flag? Yeah. So, the way it flutters. So that's what happened to my head and neck. And so that kind of gave me neck trouble for almost a year and a half later at times, if I wasn't watching it. And much later also sometimes. So I still have to watch it because there are some muscles there which are torn or damaged. So which can go into a spasm.
So head was swaying like that, literally.
Not swaying, it was fluttering. So it was like in the span of like half a second, it must have gone up and down like 7-8 times or more. It was just, it was like this. Okay, so this is what happened to the head and neck. And then I could feel the seat tilting because the first small parachute comes out.
Yeah.
Right, which slows you down relative to the airflow. So when you're ejecting, I ejected at a relatively low speed, about 450 kilometers per hour. That's the gliding speed of the aircraft. And but you have to be slowed down from there for the main parachute not to burst because of the speed, the impact of the airflow. So it slows you down. So that little parachute deploys and that tilts the seat like this. So I could feel myself tilting and the legs kind of being raised from an upright attitude like this. And then the next thing is the main parachute opened with a whack and the seat kind of fell away. And in that opening shock of that and the seat falling away, there was this pull, which again did some damage to my back muscles. And so there was this very sharp kind of a pain which hit the back. And as the chute opened, the eyesight came back. So 2 seconds of all dark and this movement. But long 2 seconds because I remember literally everything that happened in sequence.
Sure.
And then suddenly it was all quiet.
Yeah.
No radio, no other noise. And the air felt cool because the cockpit was hot.
Yeah.
And here I was and a little bit of swinging, but which I was okay with. I was para-trained in the NCC. So it was a familiar this thing to me to that extent. And my plane was just right ahead of me. Like 150 meters ahead of me.
Yeah.
So that's the position that we fly in what we call the fighting position with other aircraft in formation.
What height were you at?
I was around 1 kilometer off the ground.
That's a crazy height.
No, it's not. I mean, in flying terms, it is kind of low.
Okay.
3,000
Flying,
feet.
yeah.
And so it took me about, must have been 3 odd minutes to get to the ground.
Did you land properly on the ground or was that a...
See, I was para-trained, so I was all this thing. While coming down, the pain was what was hitting me.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know at the time whether I had broken the spine because that's a very common injury to happen.
Yeah.
So at that time, all these wild thoughts are going about. If I've broken my spine, will I fly again? Will I be fit to fly?
Yeah.
And think to myself, no, I want to fly.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, I need to get better. So that for a few seconds, that is a thought. And then again, you can't breathe properly because your chest is not expanding adequately to allow you to breathe because of the pain.
Yeah.
And then you remember that, all right, I should do diaphragmatic breathing, stomach breathing, so that I'm not stressing the rib cage and the spine or whatever is hurting. And at that point of time, my thought was that I probably damaged my spine in some way. It was only the later X-rays that showed that the spine was intact. I had a muscle contusion, but which was painful. And then as I came close to the ground, then I said, okay, I've got to land. I know the winds are about 10, 15 knots because we can do our corrections for those winds.
Yeah.
So winds are not a good thing when you're doing a landing, etc. Right? But so I knew that this is what was happening. Tried to control the thing. There were 2 large thorny bushes that came in the way, I was heading towards them, right? So I knew I was going to land in them. I knew they were full of thorns, so I didn't want to be there. So here I was trying to control the parachute trajectory as I had been taught 7 years before by the Air Force. And I managed to land between the 2 of them. And the moment I landed, the wind just took the parachute canopy, it would have dragged me.
Yeah.
But the parachute collapsed against the bush, that thorny bush, large one. And so I didn't get dragged. I couldn't do the proper landing para roll because my feet went like 6-8 inches into the sand.
Yeah.
Right? So I just came down. I was all ready to do that smart para roll. And the feet just went in and I came down with a whack on my bottom And that was it. So very undignified landing. But it was okay. I was safe. I was alive. And my leader at the time, we were in the 2 aircraft formation. So he was then squadron leader Neelu Parashar. He was orbiting around my aircraft. So he had witnessed the entire ejection.
Yeah.
Right? Because when I started to give the calls and all that thing,
Yeah.
so he was in the air watching me. He saw the ejection. He saw the fire and flame behind the aircraft. He saw the ejection. He saw me coming down. So he kept coming lower and orbiting around me. And
Okay.
later on, he told me in the hospital that at one point I was so slow that my own aircraft could have stalled and I would have joined you on the ground. So because he was so intent on watching his number 2.
Yeah.
That's me, young pilot.
You wanted to
and,
make sure that everything's fine, that you ejected properly.
Yeah. So he was giving his calls to the base to say, okay, ejection is safe, parachute is deployed. Now he's at so and so height. And then as I landed, so I could hear him because I could see him also. He was just about 100 meters off the ground in a slow orbit around me. So I got off, took off the parachute harness and stood kind of straight up so that he could see that I could stand.
Yeah, that you're fine.
Right? And I raised my hand and I waved at him.
Yeah.
Just to indicate that, I'm
You're
okay.
fine. Yeah.
He transmitted that to say he's standing up, he's waving, he's all right. Okay, so there was a big, kind of collective sigh of relief at the base, the people who were listening. And of course, they scrambled the helicopter to look for me.
Yeah.
It took them about an hour to find me. People gathered, villagers who were out with their goats and cattle. And then with their help, we lit a fire so that they could see the smoke. Otherwise, the helicopter was unable to spot me.
Yeah.
Although we had spread out the parachute on the ground, but the orange color of the parachute and all that merged with the sand, I think.
Yeah.
They couldn't see me. And so then I asked them to gather some wood. Somebody had a matchbox. We lit a fire. The smoke was immediately seen. Then they came down, picked me up, and that's how that.
This entire ejection sequence, all of this transpired because you chose to eject. Now, what if, let's say, a pilot passes out? Can he still eject, or probably he won't be able to do all of this? But will the ejection sequence kind of automatically begin if the aircraft realizes that the pilot has passed out?
No.
Then it's a definite crash. Does that ever happen?
Yeah.
People do pass out, and
Yes.
it's usually because of the G-force.
Yeah. There can be a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
When a person is passed out is one thing, but if a person is unaware that he's so close to the ground or is about to hit the ground,
Yeah.
that's called loss of situational awareness, because the person at that instant doesn't know that in the next 2 or 3 or 4 seconds the aircraft is going to hit the ground, and he is attending to something else at that point of time.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's called controlled flight into terrain, where the aircraft just goes into the ground.
Yeah.
It's controlled flight, right?
Yeah.
It was actually being piloted, but in that instant, not being actively piloted.
Flying in itself to me seems so interesting and so adventurous. So I want to ask you some things around flying, right? So, firstly, how fast have you flown? Have you gone to, let's say, Mach 1 or something close to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Mach
So
1.5.
all fighters of this generation, what is called Gen 3 and beyond,
Yeah.
are supersonic.
Okay, so they are all beyond Mach 1.
They all can fly beyond Mach 1.
Okay.
You don't fly Mach 1 every day.
Yeah.
You don't need to. And it is too much of fuel,
Yeah.
being consumed
Yeah.
to go fast.
Yeah.
So you go as fast as you need to do your operational assignments.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes you go very fast if you want to evade some threat.
Have you been chased?
All the time in peacetime,
Okay.
because we practice to fight every day,
Yeah. Yeah.
every sortie. So there's a lot of combat, a lot of things where these are mock combats, right?
Yeah.
So,
Mock combats.
Yeah. But which are as scary as anything or
Yeah.
as dangerous as anything that you'll do in
Correct.
war. It's just that at that in peace, no one is firing live bullets at
Yeah.
you or live missiles at you,
Yeah.
right? But for us, it is the same thing, because unless you can bring the same kind of live intensity to it,
Yeah.
you won't perform. So to have when you come down and in the debrief somebody says, "Yeah, I had you in my crosshairs.
Yeah.
I shot you here or there," and he has to prove that I got a shot on you, that your where you were, where I was, the ranges, etc., all those parameters are met, and my missile would have hit you.
Yeah. An actual missile under those circumstances
Would have hit you.
would have hit you.
Yeah. But all of this has to be, in the debriefs that we do thereafter,
Yeah.
it has to be proven.
Does the sonic boom that gets created behind your aircraft, does that damage the aircraft in any way?
No.
It's harmless to the
just
aircraft.
compressed air.
It's compressed air, yeah.
A sonic boom is just compressed air.
Yeah.
And the aircraft is ahead of the boom.
Yeah. Because it's traveling faster than sound.
Yeah, at that point of time. And so the shock wave or that wave of compressed air will come down and rattle windows, sometimes break them.
It can break the windows.
Yeah, it can. Right?
Window of the aircraft you're talking about.
No.
Achha,
Nothing to do with the aircraft.
Nothing to do with the
Aircraft, you don't even know that you have gone supersonic unless you're watching the instruments that are telling you that you've just crossed Mach 1.
Wow. Okay.
Right? Otherwise, there is no sensation of going supersonic.
Yeah.
But the aircraft flies differently. Okay, so the aircraft tells you that I'm flying in an envelope where I'm not greatly comfortable turning or maneuvering.
Okay. So kind of an alarm that goes off
It's
probably,
not an
or
alarm, not
no?
an
It just
alarm.
tells you. Okay.
It's just a characteristic of how the aerodynamics of the aircraft works when you're on those flow regimes.
Correct. How hard is it to land on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the sea versus landing on actual land on an airstrip?
As an Air Force pilot, never done it, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Okay, it's much more dangerous because you're basically landing on a very short moving runway.
Yeah.
Right. So it takes a lot of training, a lot of work, and you have to be truly on the ball to be able to do that. So the big thing is the takeoff is an assisted takeoff.
Yeah.
On a runway, we take off using the whole runway length.
Yeah.
Right, or whatever length is required to roll and take off. Out here, the aircraft will not be able to achieve the required speed in the distance that's available to it.
Yeah.
Right. So it is catapulted out.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a lot of G forces or acceleration forces in this direction.
Yeah.
So the pilot would be kind of crushed against the back of the seat and so on and so forth with very high acceleration. Like even in a car, when you suddenly, hit
Press
the accelerator,
acceleration,
you feel this backward push,
Yeah.
right? So it is just multiplied many times. Similarly, when you land, the speed at which you land is based on the aerodynamics of the aircraft,
Yeah.
right? And even though the aircraft carrier tries to ease it for you by flying in upwind and so on, at that point of time, it's just not adequate to stop the aircraft by natural means. So it's an arrested landing.
Yeah.
So you land, you have to have that hook and that wire meet.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, then actually the moment of landing, the aircraft carrier carrier pilot has to open the throttles and go back to full power
And then take off again?
in case the hook misses the wire.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So if the arrest does not take place,
Yeah.
right, he's just going to roll off into the sea if his throttles are idle. So he has to go full throttle at that point of time to quickly build the speed required to be afloat and
So-
then nurse the aircraft back
Yeah.
into a flying speed.
So for perspective, he has to first slow down the aircraft when he's landing. And if he
landing speed.
misses, landing speed. And then if he misses this, then he has to immediately accelerate so it doesn't crash in the sea.
He doesn't wait to miss it.
Yeah.
Right? He opens he's supposed to open the throttles fully
Yeah.
at the point of touchdown, irrespective of whether, And
That is
the
very
moment
complex.
moment the arresting takes place,
Yeah.
then he pulls the throttle back.
So he waits for that string to get attached first, just to be safe.
Yeah. So the moment he knows that the arrest has taken place successfully, he immediately slams the throttle back.
Yeah.
And then so he's decelerated to a stop in a very short length. Like if I was landing on a runway, I would have to decelerate half the runway length available to me
Yeah.
to slow down at a relatively okay rate, like we do in airlines, for example,
Yeah.
right? In his case, he has to be decelerated to a full stop, so as not to roll off the carrier in a very short distance.
Wow.
Like 100 something meters or 200 meters kind of a
Wow.
thing. So obviously that arresting thing is also stressful on the body because the rest of the body wants to be at 300, whatever, 270 kilometers, 250
Yeah.
kilometers per hour.
Yeah.
But the plane is coming to zero speed, right? So the straps are holding him in. But every organ in the body wants to pop out and keep going, keep flying at that speed, right? That's inertia.
Correct. Inertia.
So like I heard one of the carrier pilots describing how it feels as if the eyeballs want to come out of the socket, and everything, your whole body is kind of straining against the straps because it's still moving forward. It's just being restrained by the straps. So it's like that.
Wow.
So one way to think about fighter flying in particular, but true of all flying,
Yeah.
is people think of the pilot strapping into the aircraft,
Yeah.
but it's more like the pilot strapping the aircraft onto his back.
That's a great way of saying it. Yeah.
Okay, so from your point of view,
Yeah.
it's you doing everything, it's you moving, etc., etc., with
Yeah.
the plane strapped to your back. So it's that.
Let's talk about G-force. What does it do to your body? 8G, 9G? Because I've seen videos on YouTube
Yeah.
wherein some videos were of trainee pilots from the US Air Force or so. And first they are normal, then they hit 1G, 2G, 3G. And till that point of time, they are fine. And then suddenly after 4G, 5G, their skin starts to, redact in a way. Their eyeballs start to pop out. What happens at 8G, 9G? Do you pass out? Does your chest feel that pressure? Can your heart stop at that kind of G?
Yeah. The G forces that we talk about, typically maneuvering G forces,
Yeah.
they act along this axis, which means it is like the force of gravity that we
Yeah.
ordinarily, feel acting in this direction.
Yeah.
Which is why you feel the pressure of the floor against the soles of your feet. Like sitting on this chair now, like we feel the pressure of the sofa
Yeah.
pressing against our muscles, right? That's because gravity is pulling us down towards it.
Also because this becomes a center of gravity, if I'm correct.
No, center of gravity is center of gravity. That's
Okay.
the center of kind of mass of your body,
Okay.
and which is typically somewhere in the middle of the hips.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. It's a little lower if you a standing woman or a standing man.
Yeah.
A little lower for the woman and a little higher for the man, because the torso versus the body mass is slightly differently placed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But the gravity is acting downwards. For us, it's acting towards the center of the earth.
Correct.
In the course of the maneuver, it is acting outwards like a centrifugal force. For example, if you were to use a sling,
Yeah.
right, and turn it around like that, the stone is feeling that force in the outwards direction.
Correct.
Okay, from this center
Yeah.
outwards
Correct.
that way. Wherever you release it, it's going to take that.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, because the normally we are all under 1G,
Yeah.
you're feeling the one time the force of gravity.
Yeah.
When it increases, everything is being pulled down towards your feet, so to say.
Yeah.
So the most movable part is what? Blood,
Yeah.
right? So the blood starts to get pulled out from the upper part of the body into the lower
To the
part
lower
of the
part.
body.
Yeah.
Okay, and the organs also want to then they are being pulled downwards,
Yeah.
right? So your heart is being pulled lower. Now the heart is trying to pump blood into the brain so as to keep your eyesight going, to
Yeah.
keep your brain being fed with blood,
Yeah.
so that you don't pass out and you don't go blind temporarily. Okay, because these are very sensitive to supply of blood, the eyes and the brain, right? They are the maximum consumer of the of whatever the nutrients the blood is carrying. So now this part of the body, being the highest, gets starved of blood the fastest. Okay, then all muscles and everything is becoming heavier. So at 7G, my forearm would weigh 7 times what it weighs ordinarily. My head would weigh 7 times the weight. So my neck has to be able to bear that weight of 7 times what it ordinarily weighs, plus the weight of the helmet which is on top of it,
Yeah.
right? Which is a couple of kilos or whatever weight that is. So that's also become suddenly, if it was a 2 kilo kind of a helmet, it would become 14 kilograms under 7G.
Yeah.
In addition to the weight of my head, which has also become 7 times. So everything has gone up in weight that much, right?
Yeah.
So the whole body is at this point of time under that stress. Okay. Rest of the thing, it is not extremely unpleasant. Your limbs and all, if you just let it rest, all it is doing is just pressing into wherever it is.
Yeah.
But the stuff that's happening in this portion is where the stress is, and it is affecting you not only in terms of sensation, but also in terms of performance of the body organs.
Yeah.
That's what hits, right? So you need to keep conscious. You need to keep yourself being able to see stuff. So your peripheral vision goes first. You get what is known as tunnel vision.
Yeah.
You can only see some portion in the center.
Yeah.
The rest of it has all gone gray, right? And then the mind starts to get affected in the sense that you can lose consciousness for a
Yeah.
few seconds and all of that. So that is what the G-force thing is like. Now, the big challenge is what? With all of this happening, you've got to continue to do what you need to do in the cockpit. So if I was in an air combat situation, I needed to look over my shoulder to see where the attacker was, right? Under these forces, I have to be able to turn my neck. My upper body has to have that much control. So I'm forcing against these forces which are opposing it,
Yeah.
trying to make my body work correctly under all of this. Right?
Yeah.
That's it. I have to keep my head up to be able to see what my instruments are saying, what's happening outside the cockpit.
Yeah.
Right? So all of these are the stresses. The sweat becomes heavy. Okay, you're sweating like mad inside the helmet and all of that,
Yeah.
especially the MiG series of aircraft.
Yeah.
And now the sweat is flowing down your forehead and into your eyes and stinging your eyes. Okay, it's flowing down your face and your cheeks, getting into your mouth, into your mask. Your mask is full of sweat,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes, and the sweat goes into the mic and stuff like that. So all of that happens. So that is what the thing is like. But typically, and the higher you go, the closer you are to being becoming unconscious.
Yeah.
So there are certain things that you do. You change your posture, you crouch, right? So that way you reduce the vertical distance between the heart and the brain.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the heart has a lot of hard work to do. The body compensates by pumping faster. So your heart rate goes up immediately under G, and your heart also beats faster.
Yeah.
So your blood pressure goes up.
Yeah.
Okay, because the body is trying to compensate for this by doing that. You can do stuff. There are certain exercises, we call them anti-G straining maneuvers, where you tighten the muscles from the stomach and this area, back, lower, core, and your legs, so that you prevent the blood from pooling there by squeezing the muscles so as not to let the blood pool and stay there. So you're trying to keep as much blood as possible in the upper part of the body.
Yeah.
So all of these things are the things you do to compensate for the G forces.
It seems very, very challenging to handle that kind of G.
It is challenging, certainly, the first time around, the second time around. One, the body starts getting used to it. The body is a fantastic mechanism, right? It acclimatizes.
Yeah.
It develops compensatory skills of its own. Okay. And then you have to keep yourself strong and fit. Your muscular tone and strength has to be there. Muscle mass helps. Muscle tone helps hugely. And you have to do what is required at that point of time. So that's training and that's discipline. Okay. So, but over a period of time, the effect, it's called G tolerance. Your G tolerance goes up because the body is compensating. So if initially at 3G it felt like a hell of a lot, after that you don't even notice 3G.
Yeah.
You're busy doing what you do. You're talking to the other pilots. You're doing your work. All that thing happens when you're maneuvering also.
Yeah.
Right. So you stop noticing that. So that the body does a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure. What is the GARUD force in the Indian Air Force? They are supposed to be the special forces of the Indian Air Force. So tell us about the GARUD.
Yeah. So each of the armed forces has its own kind of commando force, called special forces. In the army, the role and the size of that force and all is on a whole different scale.
Yeah.
But the Navy and the Air Force have their own special, force trained people.
Yeah.
Small cadres of very highly trained people, commando skills. Obviously, the Navy will use it with a maritime flavor for activities that are related to marine operations, naval operations.
Yeah.
The Air Force will use it in ways that are suitable and where those skills are required for the Air Force way of doing things. So sometimes people tend to equate them with the Army Special Forces, which is a whole different way of doing business on a larger scale, right? So the GARUDs have specific roles which are related to Air Force's operational missions. Okay. So some people tend to think of them as people who are there to safeguard critical installations. We could use them in that way in certain critical situations. For example, an attack is imminent, you have hard intelligence, attack imminent on some critical infrastructure thing. You will want to put GARUDs there. But they're not really a sentry force or a defensive force. They're an offensive force.
Okay,
yeah.
Attack.
So their job is mainly that. For example, if you have pilots who get downed in enemy territory, who eject or have to, force land in enemy territory, and you want to retrieve those. Okay, then you would use GARUDs for that kind of a thing, where the aircraft that is going in to pick them up will carry some GARUDs on board. Okay, so that if you face enemy action at that point of time, the GARUDs are there too.
Something that happened with Abhinandan?
Not really. Abhinandan wasn't pulled out by us. Okay, he was repatriated through the normal course from
route.
The Pakistani side to us.
Okay. So the recent attack that happened on India, the terrorist attack in Pahalgam, right? Very, very unfortunate. A lot of our brothers lost, Indian citizens, innocent people who had gone there just to probably spend their vacation or have a good time. And this came as a surprise as much as to them as to us, right? So, and of course, India is now preparing its own strategy. I'm sure in correct time, the Modi government will respond in kind, right? So in this kind of a situation and such situations that have happened before in the country, what is the role of the Indian Air Force? How can they help? What do they generally do? And how does that work?
Anything of this nature, the response is not by any single force. So it's not as if the Air Force will decide to do something in response to X action that happens or incident that happens, right? It is part of a larger strategy that could be worked out either zonally, depending on if it's a regional thing, or at a national level, if it has a national kind of a significance. So in this particular case, there's a variety of different actions that the government of India could exercise. It is already exercising and put into motion things that some of which are visible to us, some of which may not be visible to us right now, and some of which may, still be at the planning stage or intent stage and may take place at some other point. Typically, if you look at it historically, how has the Indian Air Force helped in counter-terrorism or counter-insurgency kind of operations? Usually, we do not exercise the fighter force for this kind of a thing because it's a big scale-up and the weapons are large. You can do certain surgical things, but then you don't do them in your own territory as a rule. It's not a good practice. Nobody does it as a rule. So what do? You act as part of the team which is going to act against that terrorist force and the people who are operating that, or against the leadership which is managing and driving that force at the rear end.
Yeah.
So the Uri attacks you have heard of,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the Indian forces carried out the famous surgical strike using special forces, right, and army. A combination of special forces and the infantry is what went in and did the damage that they did in that surgical strike.
Yeah.
The Air Force had certain roles to play in support of these.
Yeah.
Okay. That's one part. Now, some of it could be related to reconnaissance, surveillance, and obtaining information.
Yeah.
It may have to do with electronic warfare. It may have to do with communications and other surveillance.
Drones?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Drones could be other aircraft. Okay. There are different aircraft which are equipped with different capabilities,
Yeah.
right? So UAVs is what we use, or we call them remotely piloted aircraft, so which are large unmanned aerial vehicles which are actually flown remotely and carry out certain tasks. So it could be that. It could be manned aircraft which are doing this. So it would vary depending on the situation and what you require for that specific capability you require for a particular operation. The other role that the Air Force would play would be with the helicopters for transporting the army troops into the area of operations, right, to achieve a certain amount of surprise. There's a famous operation for 20 years odd ago, 21 years ago, called Sarp Vinash, in which a large force had infiltrated from POK and gathered on our side, and we got intelligence of it, the armed forces and the intelligence agencies. And so an operation was launched to crush this particular force. So it was a combination of Air Force and Army, with the Air Force taking the Army in a surprise fashion to position them as appropriately required tactically, and then the Army doing the rest of the job on the ground, right? Yeah. So you operate as a team, as a joint team with the Army and the Air Force working in these areas. It could also be Army, Navy, Air Force joint team. Yeah. There are times when sometimes our GARUDs have joined along with Army units who are doing counter-terrorist activities, right? A couple of them have got killed in the process as well. Similarly, the Marcos, that's in Marine Commandos, have also joined in operations which have taken place near the lakes, right? So you use a combination of what you have. So the Air Force is part of the team bringing the aviation capabilities, right, which is our specialty,
to any operation,
to that teamwork.
Yeah, to that particular team and that particular task.
Yes.
Slightly controversial question. Let's say that there is a terrorist threat, and I was reading this somewhere, that's why I thought I'll clarify this, and I'm not sure whether this is true or not, but best ways to ask you. If there is a hijack that has happened, a plane is hijacked, and it's, let's say, about 50 clicks or 100 clicks away from Mumbai, right? And there is no communication with the hijackers. So one case is that they have a demand that they need so-and-so terrorists freed from a prison, or they need so-and-so million of dollars, right, placed somewhere in some account. But if there is no communication, can the Indian Air Force scramble fighter jets and look at the last resort, which is probably, instead of a plane bringing down a building, a skyscraper, can we look at bringing the plane down? I mean, is that an option for us, or how does that go?
This is a bit of a crazy thought.
Yes, that's why I said controversial question.
It works good in these things. But see, if you're referencing it to 9/11, 9/11
that's what I was coming to.
Was something that no one could have foreseen because it was a whole different way of doing things and at a scale that was unprecedented. But ordinarily, that's not how hijacks work.
Yeah.
And if you go historically into how hijacks have been planned and executed, it is with a certain aim in mind. There's certain gain, right,
Yeah.
that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Whether it's release of some of their own comrades or whether it's something else, the hijacker wants something from you.
Yeah.
So he's trying to coerce you psychologically by putting
Yeah.
your people at danger and trying to force you psychologically to concede his demands, right? So we're talking about basically a rational hijacker, okay, with a demand which is possible to practically be met.
Yeah.
Whether or not we give in, whether or not we, resist that is another question.
Yeah.
So that's not how anti-hijack operations happen. And as far as if, for example, there is no contact, like you said, no communication with the hijackers, then first my counter question would be, how do you know it's hijacked? That's number one. Okay, there are ways in which you can know.
Yeah.
Okay, but suppose you've realized that there is a hijack, but you don't seem to be able to communicate
Yeah.
with the hijackers. Do we know their intent? We don't,
Yeah.
right? Because like you said, no communication.
Yeah.
So in the absence of intent, would you just endanger passenger lives, civilian lives by, preemptively shooting at the plane? You don't.
Yeah. You
Okay,
don't.
so let's put that question absolutely to rest.
Yeah.
This is not an option you consider ordinarily.
Yeah.
All right. You want to know what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
You want to find out more. There are people who are trained in doing that. There are SOPs in place to handle hijacks. All Air Force bases, all civilian airfield staff, and the other agencies in governance.
Yeah.
Okay, they're all trained in how to handle this.
Yeah.
Okay, so for example, at an Air Force base, we do every 6 months anti-hijack kind of a
Drill?
review,
Okay,
a review
Yeah.
of the things, and activate the agencies just to take a look at, okay, SOPs, you're supposed to be doing this, I'm supposed to be doing this. Are we coordinated? Are we on the same page? Is there something you think we need to do to bring greater clarity?
Yeah.
Who's going to be doing what? Does everybody understand his role? All of these things are done.
Yeah.
Okay, so whereas base commander, every 6 months, we used to do this particular exercise. It's a whole day's exercise that we do with the local people, right? So there are SOPs in place. There are, but you cannot really plan for an insane or an irrational kind of an eventuality.
Yeah. It is irrational. Let me admit that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So you can't have a plan for irrationality.
Yeah.
You'll deal with it depending on what form that particular episode takes.
Yeah.
Right? So it will be the best judgment, and you'll bring to bear those resources and those skills that
Yeah.
you have at your disposal and try to
At that point
solve
of time.
that situation.
Yeah. Try to diffuse it whichever way possible.
That's right.
Regarding the ejection question, I had one more follow-up question on that. Let's say that a pilot has to eject in the middle of the ocean. Then he lands up in the sea. How do you communicate and how do people find you in that situation?
Yeah. So these things are also built into, because these things have evolved over a period of time.
Yeah.
Okay. So a huge number of people have got out of aircraft and into the sea.
Into the sea.
Second World War was full of it. They didn't have ejection seats at the time. You had to bail out manually.
Yeah.
So you would open the canopy and jump out, and then open the parachute yourself. And then, the pilots used to have the British and the Germans and the French pilots crossing the oceans to fight each other, all of that. They used to have life jackets. Okay. So the first thing is that you don't drown.
Yeah.
Right? And then there are certain other things, like right now, these days, you have even satellite communication sets which are fixed into the thing. And there is a battery in that. So it sends out a particular signal that is picked up by satellites.
A distress call.
Yeah, not a call, it's a distress signal.
Distress signal.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it has a certain identifier. That signal keeps going,
Yeah.
right? And the rescue aircraft have a receiver for that signal,
Uh-huh.
right? So when the search operation begins, at some point you'll pick up that signal and
Yeah.
start to do that. There are dyes that you can use to mark your position,
Yeah.
which increase your visibility.
Color
in the
dyes,
ocean.
red, yellow, and all that.
That's right. So high visibility dyes are
Yeah.
there. So people who fly over we have Jaguar pilots or MiG-29 pilots who operate and over the oceanic areas. Or earlier we had the MiG-27 with the
Yeah.
maritime roles. So their ejection seat survival packs and the equipment pack is different.
Yeah.
There's a small dinghy that self-inflates.
Wow. So pilot doesn't have to be in the water continuously. He can be on
He
the
can
dinghy.
climb onto the dinghy.
On the dinghy. Yeah.
So and that dinghy is connected to his flying thing
Yeah.
with a strap.
Yeah. So he doesn't lose the dinghy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of these things over a period of time have evolved.
One more slightly controversial question. I have been, since the time I was a kid, right, I have been watching these documentaries on the Discovery Channel and now on Netflix that speak about a lot of Air Force pilots in the US, in South American countries, in Canada, that fly at a very high altitude. They end up seeing UFOs, unidentified flying objects, right? Not calling them alien at this point of time. Probably some of them are. Probably they are advanced military drones by enemy countries that you don't really know at that point of time. So not just specifying that it's aliens as such, but have you had an experience like that wherein you've seen a UFO, or you saw something which you did not understand and you had to report it back? Also, give you one more example in that. A very famous case of the Tic Tac UFO incident, in which Commander James Fravor, who was flying at a very high altitude, and he saw this UFO and he captured. And this thing, whatever it was, it didn't look like it was man-made. It did not use the traditional IC engine, and it dropped down in altitude by something like 50 or 60,000 feet in a second, which is impossible speed. Plus, we are not even talking about the inertia that can cause. So, have you experienced something like that?
No. All of us have seen things in the air that can, it can be from floaters of your own eyes to a spot on your canopy. And there are times when, on a flying on a dark night and you take off and you turn your head and you see this bright light which appears to be moving. Actually, it's not moving, it's Venus. Okay, but there so people have tried to shoot down Venus also. So all kinds of things are seen, but no real experience. Sadly, that has eluded me. But it's an extremely fascinating thing in the aviation community. And there have been a variety of different experiences that people have chronicled and recorded. Some of them very convincing. A lot of them explained by other phenomena. Right. Yeah. So sadly, I don't have an experience.
I always love asking my guests about what is the best life advice that they have got. So what is the best life advice that you received probably in your early 20s or 30s, and what was it and how did you implement it?
Life advice. One image I have of myself is like a patchwork quilt made up of little patches, and each patch was contributed by a different person at a different time.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm made up of 100 different words of wisdom that people dropped all around me, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, right? And all of them have been precious. So sometimes I look back and I actually wonder if there is anything really original about me at all. Okay. To identify them would be a difficult task, but I'd say that the people who have an influence on us, I think for every single individual who's had the good fortune of being raised by parents, they are always your first teachers, right?
Yeah.
You learn from them. You learn not because of what they told you. You learn from how they were and how they conducted themselves. And the biggest lessons in life have come from people who were credible because what they said and how they were was the same thing.
Yeah.
And there are times when they don't have to say a thing. They are the lesson.
Wow.
And there are times when such people will say things and that stay with you for life.
Yeah.
There's a very powerful quote. I don't know whose it is. I must have read that about 30, 35 years ago, perhaps. It said, I can't hear what you say. What you do speaks so loudly. I can't hear what you say.
Wow.
Okay. So that's stayed with me forever.
It's going to stay with me now.
So our instructors who taught us flying, within the first 10 sorties, they had taught us the basics of what it would take to survive throughout a flying career, if we were listening, and if we didn't forget those words. Right? So those people are the ones who shaped us and made us, our instructors, early instructors.
Yeah.
And all gratitude to them. Then in each unit, you have your seniors right? That's your senior leadership.
Yeah.
They shape you in 100 different ways on a daily basis
Yeah.
through how they respond to challenges, to how they respond to stresses. Watching them is how you build resilience, psychological resilience, because you see them handle, very dark things that happen, crashes, your comrades die, you're carrying their coffin on your shoulders, right? You're doing the funeral, you're looking after the family at that time, and these are soul-crushing moments, okay? And how they handle it is a lesson of a lifetime.
Absolutely.
Right? And these are the things that have become part of your personality, part of your attitudes as you grow. There are, to a person who wants to learn or who is receptive to learning, it doesn't matter if the person is senior or junior. Right? You learn equally from a person who is junior to you if what is bringing to the table is that impressive. Right? So it's a matter of how receptive one is really speaking. That's how it is. And if you say, if I was speaking to this audience, I would say, be receptive. Life brings lessons in your path all the time. Right? But we have to. You know what I learned? There is no such thing as teaching. There isn't such a thing as teaching. There is only learning. And the learner will learn even if there is no teacher.
Yeah.
Right? And the best of the teachers won't be effective if the learner refuses to learn. So the whole thing comes down to active learning.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest challenges for all of us is to continue to remain an active learner.
According to you, if someone is, let's say, in their 20s or 30s, a very, very aspirational person who wants to make it big in life, what are those 2 or 3 books that person should definitely read?
That's a very difficult question. I was brought up as much by books as by my parents and the teachers. Okay?
Wow.
And my early life was just full of books. We were a family of readers. So to identify 1 or 2 books, very, very difficult. I read a hell of a lot of military history. I probably have the cheapest library of military history in the world because they were brought off the footpaths of Bombay and from Raddiwalas at the cost of those days, 25 paise, 50 paise, 1 rupee, 2 rupees. I used to bring them home.
Yeah.
School had taught us how to do book binding. So I used to bind them at home. Yeah. So I have this, several hundred books on military history. And they have entirely shaped my entire career.
Yeah.
Okay. And reading is one thing that I think the younger generation is losing out on. Yeah. There are far too many distractions. There are far too many diversions, especially coming from the little screen. Yeah. And that is taking one away from the experience of wholesome reading.
Yeah.
Reading works in a different way because it requires you to be attentive completely and for a longer duration, right? So you get into that flow state, whether it's a story, whether it's a narration, whether it's an explanation of something or the other. It draws you in and keeps you in the flow state in which you're actually absorbing so much more. So my suggestion would be to get into the reading habit. One of the most powerful books I read was also one of the smallest, and that's Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach.
Oh.
Right? And it's about this seagull whose name is Jonathan Livingston Seagull and who's a maverick and doesn't fit with the rest of the gull tribe. Okay, so he's kind of ostracized and everybody, thinks that he is wacko and his... But there's something else on his mind. He sees a way to be better and that the gull can do better than what the rest of the gulls are doing by simply conforming to tradition. So he wants to discover his own strengths, explore where his wings can take him, explore the limits of his own powers. And that's one of the most inspiring stories that has stayed with me. Richard Bach, great author. Read everything that he's ever written.
Wow.
A number of other books. There are, if you're aspirational when it comes to the military, then there are just many, many books written by military people. A lot of them anecdotal, lot of them with their personal experience, and which have had a very powerful impact on me. I've read a lot of biographies and autobiographical works of military leaders because I wanted to know how they performed under the conditions and challenges that they underwent. So famous generals, famous air marshals, people who pioneered new military thought. Okay, so a lot of them. Any books on generals like Patton, like Rommel, on the Indian side, Sagat Singh, military genius. So just some brilliant people. A lot of our own earlier military leaders have been absolutely fantastic. Shivaji, the Peshwa, okay, Lachit Borphukan in Assam. We don't know anything about them. These were military geniuses who leveraged whatever modest resources they had to bring down much bigger enemies.
Wow.
Okay, we are not in touch with them, right? I would definitely recommend that you do some of that reading.
Wow.
It's a great idea to read the people who are writing about the future. In the 80s, there were these books by Alvin and Heidi Toffler. Okay, Future Shock was one of them, and then they wrote a few more books after that. Thomas Friedman, The Flat Earth, and the other books that he's written. So people who are writing about the future are exploring the limits of what we can see right now.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the people to read because that pulls you out of your present, of being moored into the present, and to know how to shape yourself to meet the coming future.
Wow.
So that would be something I would definitely recommend.
Absolutely. That seems great. I am personally going to read some of those books that you just mentioned right now. So, Dhananjay sir, thank you so much for entertaining the fanboy in me. Thank you so much for...
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for making me wiser than what I was when I entered this room with you.
Thank you.
And just thank you so much for being so cool and so amazing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Jaideep, for the opportunity, and Belina and team
Thank you,
Brown
sir.
Guy podcast. It's been a pleasure being with all of you.
Thank you, sir. Same here. Wow. I am currently going through a brain freeze. Whatever sir just spoke about absolutely blew me away. Especially those close calls, which I knew are going to be coming in this podcast. But trust me, I was not prepared for it. If you guys love the podcast, please let us know in the comment section below. If there is something specific that you would want me to ask sir in my next podcast with him, then I would love to have suggestions from your side. Also, one quick request. Me and my team, we just started this. We are very, very new at this, right? So if you want to support us, please like, follow, share, and subscribe on all our channels. Thank you so much. Enjoy the Brown Guy podcast.